Story 1. The Backwards Mile Marker. Danny Cortez had been driving interstate routes for 23 years, and in that time he'd developed an almost religious relationship with mile markers. They were his meditation, his rhythm, his proof that the world moved forward in predictable increments. Every 5,280 feet, another green sign would flash past his window, counting upward as he pushed his Kenworth west across the empty stretches of Nevada's I-80. It was February 14, 2019, just past 2 in the morning, and Danny was hauling refrigerated pharmaceuticals from Salt Lake City to Sacramento, a route he'd driven at least 200 times before. The night was crystalline and cold, the kind of high desert darkness where stars pressed down so thick they seemed touchable. Danny had his CB radio tuned to channel 19, but the chatter had died off an hour ago. Most drivers had pulled into truck stops by now, but Danny preferred the solitude of the graveyard shift. His wife Sharon used to say he was born nocturnal, that the night understood him better than daylight ever could. He'd laughed when she said it, but there was truth there. Mile marker 248 slipped past, then 249. Danny sipped lukewarm coffee from his thermos and adjusted his heating vent. The temperature gauge outside read 19 degrees. His GPS showed smooth sailing for the next 150 miles, nothing but straight road through the Humboldt Range. Not even a town worth mentioning until he hit Winnemucca. He liked this stretch. No traffic, no construction, no highway patrol hiding behind overpasses. Just him and the dotted white line disappearing under his hood. Mile marker 250 appeared in his headlights and vanished behind him. Then 251. Danny felt his mind starting to wander the way it always did on these empty highways, thinking about his daughter's college tuition, the grinding noise his refrigeration unit had been making, whether he should finally replace the shocks on the passenger side. The road was hypnotic, therapeutic even, and he let himself sink into the comfortable numbness of highway meditation. Mile marker 252 passed, then 253, then 252. Danny blinked hard, shook his head slightly. He must have misread it. Fatigue playing tricks. He'd been driving for 9 hours straight, only stopping once for fuel in Elko. But he knew better than to push through exhaustion. He glanced at his watch, 2:17 a.m. He'd give it another hour, then pull into the rest area near Winnemucca for a power nap. Mile marker 253 slid past again, then 252. This time Danny felt his stomach tighten. That wasn't right. That wasn't possible. He looked at his speedometer, 63 miles per hour, steady as always. He looked at his GPS, the blue arrow showing his truck moving forward along the highway. The distance to Winnemucca slowly decreasing. Everything indicated forward motion, but the mile markers were going backward. He keyed his CB radio. Breaker 19, anybody out there? This is Nighthawk westbound on I-80 near mile marker. Well, I'm not entirely sure anymore. Anybody copy? Static answered him. Danny waited 30 seconds and tried again. Nothing. The channel was dead, which was unusual but not unprecedented in these remote stretches. Sometimes you could go 50 miles without hearing another voice. Mile marker 251 appeared, then 250, then 249. Danny's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This was wrong. This was fundamentally impossibly wrong. He was maintaining speed. The engine was running smoothly, but the mile markers were counting backward. He glanced in his mirrors, nothing but darkness and the red glow of his taillights reflecting off empty asphalt. No other vehicles, no lights, nothing. He checked his GPS again. According to the device, he'd traveled another 2 miles westward, but the mile markers told a different story. Mile marker 248 passed, then 247, then 246. He was moving backward through space while every instrument in his truck insisted he was moving forward. Danny considered pulling over, but something stopped him. An instinct maybe, or a superstition. If he stopped, Would he start sliding backward faster? Would the truck roll in reverse on its own? The thought was absurd, but then again, so was watching mile markers count down while traveling at highway speed. Mile marker 245 flashed past, then 244. He'd lost almost 10 miles now, going backward through space he'd already covered. Danny grabbed his cell phone from the charging mount. No signal. Not even one bar. He was in a dead zone, which happened sometimes in the mountains, but usually his GPS compensated. His GPS still showed him moving forward, eating up miles toward his destination, but the physical reality outside his window contradicted it completely. Mile marker 243, then 242, then 241. The coffee in his thermos began to taste metallic. Danny's mouth went dry. He tried the CB again, cycling through channels, but found only static. He turned on his stereo. Static there too, though it had been playing classic rock just an hour ago. Even the preset stations had vanished into white noise. Mile marker 240 appeared in his headlights, and Danny noticed something else. The reflectors between the lane dividers, those small plastic squares that helped drivers see the road at night, they were glowing brighter than normal. Not reflecting his headlights, but glowing with their own luminescence. A pale greenish light that pulsed faintly, almost breathing. Mile marker 239, then 238. Danny's breathing quickened. His heart hammered against his ribs. 20 years of driving, and he'd never experienced anything like this. He'd seen strange things on the road, UFOs that were probably military aircraft, hitchhikers that vanished from rest stops, weird lights in the desert. But this was different. This violated the basic rules of reality. He thought about Sharon, about calling her when this was over, about trying to explain what was happening. She'd think he'd fallen asleep, that he was describing a dream. Maybe that's what this was. Maybe he dozed off and this was a stress dream, his subconscious working through the monotony of the road. But the cold air from the vent felt real against his face. The vibration of the engine through the steering wheel felt real. The growing panic in his chest felt desperately, terribly real. Mile marker 237 passed, then 236, then 235. He was approaching the spot where he'd first noticed the backward progression, mile marker 235, which should have been 20 miles behind him by now. What would happen when he reached it? Would he keep going backward indefinitely, erasing his entire journey? Would he wind up back in Salt Lake City, then further, reversing through days and weeks until he unexisted? The thought made him grip the wheel so hard his knuckles went white. He eased off the accelerator slightly, dropping to 55 miles per hour as if slower might stop whatever was happening. But the mile markers continued their backward march, indifferent to his speed. Mile marker 234, then 233. The road itself looked wrong now. The asphalt seemed darker, somehow older, as if he were driving on a version of the highway from decades past. The paint on the lane dividers looked fresher, brighter. Danny squinted ahead and realized the road surface was completely clear. No tire marks, no debris, no oil stains. It looked freshly paved, virgin asphalt that had never known traffic. Mile marker 232, then 231. Danny's hands started shaking. He tried to pray but couldn't remember the words. He'd never been particularly religious, but his grandmother's voice echoed in his head from childhood. If you see something wrong in the world, something that shouldn't be, don't look at it directly, don't acknowledge it, and maybe it'll pass you by. But how could he not acknowledge this? It was happening to him, around him, through him. Mile marker 230 appeared, and then something changed. The road ahead began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer asphalt, except it was 19 degrees outside. The shimmer intensified, and Danny saw something impossible, his own truck approaching from the opposite direction. Not another truck like his truck. Same make, same model, same rust spot on the lower passenger door, same company logo, same license plate. The other truck passed him going eastbound. He saw himself in the driver's seat, jaw slack, eyes wide with terror, staring at him as they crossed paths. The other Danny's mouth was moving, shouting something Danny couldn't hear. Then it was gone, swallowed by darkness in his mirrors. Mile marker 229 flashed past, then 228. The backward progression continued. Danny's breath came in short gasps now. He'd just seen himself traveling in the opposite direction on the same highway at the same time. A perfect reflection, except reversed. The other Danny had looked terrified, and that terrified him even more because he knew exactly how that other version felt. Mile marker 227, then 226. The glowing reflectors between lanes pulsed brighter, and Danny noticed they were pulsing in sequence, creating a wave pattern that flowed eastward, the direction the mile markers were counting. As if the road itself was pulling him backward, reeling him in like fishing line, he pressed the accelerator harder, pushing the truck to 70 miles per hour. The engine groaned, and his cargo shifted slightly, but the mile markers kept their backward rhythm. Speed made no difference. Whatever force controlled this, physics had no say in it. Mile marker 225 passed, then 224. Danny tried to remember if anything unusual had happened before this started. Had he passed through something? A fog bank maybe, or under a bridge. He retraced his memory. Nothing. Just mile marker after mile marker, counting up like they were supposed to until suddenly they weren't. Mile marker 223, then 222. His fuel gauge caught his attention. 3/4 full, same as it had been for the last hour. The numbers on his odometer weren't moving. He'd traveled what felt like 30 miles backward, but his truck's instruments insisted he hadn't moved at all. Or rather, they showed forward progress that the external world rejected. Mile marker 221 appeared, and Danny made a decision. At the next exit, no matter how far, he was getting off this highway. He'd drive surface streets, take back roads, abandon the truck if he had to. Anything to escape this impossible regression. But when he checked his GPS for the next exit, the screen showed nothing. No exits, no towns, no services, just a straight blue line extending infinitely in both directions. He knew there were exits. He'd taken them dozens of times on this route, but according to his GPS, they'd ceased to exist. Mile marker 220, then 219, then 218, the temperature inside the cab dropped suddenly. Danny could see his breath misting in front of him. The heating system was still running, but the warmth had been sucked away by something. The windows began to frost around the edges, ice crystals forming patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like writing in a language he didn't recognize. Mile marker 217 passed, and then Danny saw the figures. They stood alongside the road, spaced at regular intervals, one at each mile marker. Human-shaped, but wrong, too tall and too thin, their proportions distorted like reflections in funhouse mirrors. They didn't move as he passed. They simply stood watching, their faces, if they had faces, turned toward his truck. Mile marker 216, another figure. This one raised its arm as Danny approached, pointing eastward, pointing backward. Danny whimpered, a sound he hadn't made since childhood. His rational mind screamed that these weren't real, couldn't be real, but his eyes insisted otherwise. The figures were there, solid and present, marking his backward journey like sentinels or judges. Mile marker 215. Another figure, this one holding something that glinted in his headlights. A mirror, Danny thought, though he couldn't be sure. Mile marker 214, then 213. The CB radio suddenly crackled to life, making Danny jump so hard he swerved slightly. A voice emerged from the static, his voice, his exact voice. "Don't stop driving," the voice said. "Whatever you do, don't stop. Keep moving backward. That's the only way through." "Through to where?" Danny shouted at the radio. "No, what the hell is happening?" Static answered him. The voice was gone. Mile marker 212 appeared, then 211. The figures stood at each marker now, and Danny realized they were becoming more distinct. more detailed. He could see clothing now, or what looked like clothing, though the style was wrong, outdated from decades or centuries past. Some wore what looked like coveralls or work clothes. Others wore suits that might have been fashionable in the 1950s or earlier. Mile marker 210. Another figure, and this one Danny recognized. It was Jake Hendricks, a driver Danny had known 15 years ago. Jake had disappeared on I-80 somewhere in this same stretch of Nevada. They'd found his truck 3 days later, parked at a rest stop, engine running, cargo intact. No sign of Jake, no explanation. The investigation concluded he'd walked away from his life, but nobody who knew Jake believed that. Now Jake stood beside mile marker 210 wearing the same clothes he'd worn the last time Danny saw him. Jake's expression was hollow, resigned. He didn't wave or acknowledge Danny. He just stood there, another sentinel marking the backward miles. Mile marker 209, then 208. Danny's tears froze on his cheeks. The temperature had dropped below zero inside the cab. His breath came out in thick clouds. The engine still ran, but the warmth was gone, stolen by whatever force controlled this place, this impossible stretch of highway that ran backward through space and time. Mile marker 207 appeared, and the figure beside it was Sharon. Danny screamed. His wife stood there, not as she was now, but as she'd been when they first met. Young, beautiful, wearing the blue sundress from their first date. She smiled at him sadly, and Danny saw tears on her face. "No," Danny sobbed. "No, no, no, you're home, you're safe at home." But Sharon, or the thing that looked like Sharon, just watched him pass, her smile never changing. Mile marker 206, then 205. Danny understood now with sudden terrible clarity. This wasn't just backward motion through space. This was regression through time, through memory, through life itself. Every mile marker was a year, maybe, or a significant moment. He was being unwound, pulled back through his existence towards some origin point he couldn't fathom. Mile marker 204 appeared, and beside it stood his father, who'd been dead for 12 years. His father waved once, a simple gesture of goodbye or greeting, then stood still like all the others. Mile marker 203, then 202. The figures were multiplying now, not just at the mile markers, but between them, lining the road like a crowd, like witnesses. Danny saw faces he recognized and faces he didn't, people from his life and strangers, all standing in impossible arrangement along this backward highway. Mile marker 201, then 200. The road surface changed again, becoming older still, rougher. The paint lines faded, then disappeared entirely. The asphalt turned to concrete, then to dirt and gravel. Danny's truck bounced over the increasingly primitive road surface, but he couldn't slow down, couldn't stop. Something compelled him forward or backward through this regression. Mile marker 199. The number on the marker looked hand-painted now, crude and weathered. Then 198. The marker was wooden, not metal, rotting at its base. Mile marker 197 wasn't there at all, just a gap where it should have been, marked by a pile of stones. Danny's vision began to blur. The cold was inside him now, in his bones, in his blood. His thoughts moved like molasses, slow and thick. He tried to remember why he was here, where he was going, who he was. The memories were slipping away, draining out through the backward miles. Mile marker 196 appeared, barely visible in the growing darkness. His headlights were dimming, or the darkness was getting stronger, swallowing light itself. Then 195, then 194. The figures along the road had become shadows, less defined, fading into the ancient darkness that predated human observation. Danny felt himself fading too, becoming less real, less substantial, as if the backward journey was erasing him from existence mile by mile, moment by moment. Mile marker 193 flickered in and out of visibility. Then suddenly, brilliantly, impossibly, mile marker 194 appeared. Danny blinked. His vision cleared slightly. Mile marker 195 flashed past, then 196. The markers were counting forward again, and with each progressive number, Danny felt reality reasserting itself. The temperature began rising. The road surface improved, asphalt replacing the primitive track. The figures vanished like smoke in wind. Mile marker 197, then 198, then 199. By mile marker 200, Danny was sobbing with relief. The road was normal I-80 again, modern and maintained. His GPS showed his position correctly. His instruments functioned normally. The CB radio hissed with distant truck driver chatter. Mile marker 201 passed, then 202. Forward, always forward now. Danny pulled into the rest area near Winnemucca 30 minutes later, just as the sun began threatening the eastern horizon. He turned off the engine with shaking hands and sat in the sudden silence, staring at nothing, trying to convince himself of his own existence. His cell phone had signal again. He called Sharon. "Danny, it's 5 in the morning, honey. You okay?" Her voice, real, solid, present, broke something inside him. He couldn't speak for a long moment. "Danny?" "I'm okay," he managed. I needed to hear your voice. I love you." "I love you too. Are you sure you're all right? You sound strange." "I'm fine. I'll be home tomorrow, I promise." He disconnected and sat in his truck as dawn broke over the Nevada desert. Other trucks pulled in, their drivers stumbling toward the restrooms or coffee vending machines. Ordinary people doing ordinary things in an ordinary world. Danny checked his GPS log. According to the data, he'd maintained steady westward progress all night. No gaps, no anomalies, no backward miles. The odometer showed the correct distance traveled. It was as if the backward journey had never happened, as if those 40 miles of regression had been excised from recorded reality. But Danny remembered every mile marker, every impossible figure standing in the darkness. He remembered Jake Hendricks and his father and Sharon in her blue sundress. He remembered the cold that had nearly frozen his soul and the terror of watching his existence unwind mile by backward mile. He delivered his load to Sacramento that afternoon and drove the return route 2 days later. When he reached that stretch of I-80 in Nevada, he watched the mile markers carefully. They counted forward properly. 248, 249, 250, 251, everything normal, everything correct. But just after mile marker 253, right where the backward progression had started, Danny saw something that made his blood freeze. A mile marker that shouldn't exist, 193.5, stood alone on the shoulder, half hidden by sagebrush. It was weathered wood, hand-painted, ancient, and impossible. Danny didn't stop. He pressed the accelerator and watched that marker shrink in his mirror until it vanished into the distance. He never drove nights on I-80 through Nevada again. When dispatchers asked why, he told them he preferred daylight driving, that he was getting too old for the graveyard shift. They accepted this without question. What else could he say? That somewhere between mile markers 253 and 193 there existed a place where the road ran backward, where time unwound, where the figures of the lost stood watch over an impossible highway. Sometimes Danny still wakes at 2:17 a.m., his heart racing, convinced he's moving backward through a dark that predates light. Sharon holds him until the panic passes, until forward motion resumes, until the world agrees to move in the right direction again. But he knows the backward mile is still out there, waiting in the Nevada darkness. And he knows that someday, some other driver will count down through those impossible numbers. We'll see those impossible figures. We'll feel their existence unwinding mile by terrible mile. Danny has stopped answering calls from other drivers on CB Channel 19, because sometimes late at night when he can't sleep, he picks up his old radio and listens. And occasionally, very occasionally, he hears a voice screaming about mile markers going backward, begging for help that Danny cannot give. He tried to help once. keyed his mic and said, "Don't stop driving. Keep moving backward. That's the only way through." The voice on the other end had been his own. Story 2, the Phantom Fuel Stop. Marcus Webb had been a long-haul trucker for 17 years, and in that time he'd developed an intimate knowledge of every fuel stop between Houston and Detroit. He knew which stations had the cleanest restrooms, which ones served hot food past midnight, which pumps were fastest, and which parking lots felt safest for overnight stops. His favorite route was US 77 through Oklahoma, straight, predictable, and dotted with reliable truck stops every 50 to 70 miles. It was a Tuesday night in October 2021 when Marcus learned that familiarity meant nothing, that the roads he thought he knew could still harbor impossible secrets. He'd left Houston at 4 in the afternoon with a load of industrial machinery bound for a factory outside Toledo. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, mild temperatures, dry roads. Marcus set his cruise control at 68 miles per hour and settled into the comfortable rhythm of highway driving. His CB radio hummed with occasional chatter. Other drivers warning about construction zones or state troopers, the usual helpful banter that kept long-distance truckers connected across empty miles. Around 11 p.m., Marcus crossed into Oklahoma. His fuel gauge showed just under half a tank, enough to reach his usual stop in Pauls Valley, about 45 miles north. He'd fueled there dozens of times, a decent Flying J with good coffee and surprisingly fresh sandwiches. He could already taste the coffee, could already see himself stretching his legs in the parking lot, checking his cargo straps before pushing on to Oklahoma City. The highway was quiet that night. Traffic had thinned to almost nothing, just an occasional car passing in the opposite direction. Their headlights brief stars in his mirrors before disappearing into the darkness behind him. Marcus liked it this way. The solitude and simplicity of the empty road. It gave him time to think, to plan, to exist in the meditative space between departure and arrival. He'd driven about 20 miles past the Oklahoma border when he saw the fuel stop. It appeared suddenly, as roadside businesses do when you're not specifically looking for them. A bright cluster of lights off to the right, the familiar tall sign of a gas station visible above the tree line. Marcus frowned slightly. He didn't remember a station here. There was supposed to be nothing between the border and Pauls Valley, just empty stretches of prairie and darkness. But there it stood, unmistakably real, its lights welcoming against the night. His fuel gauge caught his eye. It had dropped to a quarter tank. That was wrong. It should still show half. Marcus tapped the gauge with his finger, wondering if the sensor was malfunctioning. The needle didn't move. Quarter tank, maybe less. He looked ahead at the fuel stop. A large sign proclaimed Jake's Travel Plaza, last fuel for 85 miles. The number 85 bothered him. Pauls Valley was only 25 miles ahead. Why would any station claim there was no fuel for 85 miles? But his gauge insisted he needed fuel, and Marcus had learned long ago not to take chances with an empty tank on lonely highways. Running out of diesel on the shoulder meant expensive service calls, angry dispatchers, and lost time. He signaled right and took the exit, his truck's air brakes hissing softly as he decelerated. The exit ramp curved through overgrown grass and scraggly trees, longer than it should have been, winding in a way that felt wrong for a simple highway off-ramp. Marcus noticed that the pavement was old, cracked, with weeds pushing through in places. Paint lines had faded to ghosts. This was an old exit, rarely used, possibly forgotten by the highway maintenance crews. At the bottom of the ramp, Marcus turned right onto a frontage road and drove toward the fuel stop. It sat alone in a clearing surrounded by dark woods on 3 sides and the highway on the 4th. As he approached, Marcus could see it more clearly, An older facility, the architectural style from maybe the 1980s or early 90s before the big corporate chains standardized everything. The building was concrete block painted pale yellow with a canopy covering 6 fuel pumps, 3 diesel, 3 gasoline. Windows glowed with warm fluorescent light. A neon open sign flickered red in one window. 2 vehicles were already there. An ancient pickup truck at one of the gas pumps and a sedan that might have been white once, but now looked gray with age and dirt. Both vehicles were empty of occupants. The building itself showed no movement, no customers visible through the windows. Marcus pulled his truck alongside the diesel pumps and set the air brake. The place felt off somehow, though he couldn't articulate exactly how. Something about the silence, maybe. No traffic noise from the highway, even though it was only 100 yards away. No wind, no insects, no ambient sound at all. Just perfect, absolute silence, broken only by the ticking of his cooling engine. He climbed down from the cab, his boots loud against the concrete. The air smelled wrong, stale, recycled, like air from a room that hadn't been opened in years. Marcus approached the pump and pulled the diesel nozzle from its holster. A handwritten sign taped to the pump face read, "Pay inside first. Cash only." Cash only was unusual but not unheard of, especially at independent stations. Marcus walked toward the building, his footsteps echoing oddly as if the sound was traveling farther than it should. The front door was glass and metal, with a small bell attached that should have rung when he pushed it open. The bell made no sound. Inside, the store was surprisingly well stocked. Shelves held candy bars, chips, motor oil, truck supplies, travel necessities. A coffee station sat against one wall, 3 pots on burners, the coffee inside looking fresh and hot. A refrigerated case held sodas and energy drinks. Everything looked normal, mundane, exactly what you'd expect from a highway fuel stop. Except for the dust. A fine layer of gray dust covered everything, the shelves, the products, the counter, the floor. Not thick enough to be immediately obvious, but present nonetheless, the kind of dust that accumulates over months or years of abandonment. Yet the lights were on, the coffee was hot, and the open sign glowed in the window. Marcus approached the counter. A cash register sat there, old-fashioned with mechanical buttons and a hand crank. No computer, no card reader, no modern technology. Behind the counter, cigarettes and tobacco products lined the wall in brands Marcus didn't recognize. "Hello," Marcus called out. His voice sounded muffled, absorbed by something. "Anybody here?" No response. Marcus waited, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Through a doorway behind the counter, he could see into a back room. More shelves, boxes, a small desk with papers scattered across it. But no people. "Hello? I need to pay for fuel." Silence answered him. Marcus stood there for a long moment, debating. He could leave $20 on the counter and pump his fuel. It was technically honest, he was attempting to pay. Or he could leave, forget this weird place, push on to Paul's Valley on whatever fuel he had left. His gauge had showed a quarter tank, which should be enough. Something made him stay. Curiosity maybe, or the nagging wrongness of the entire situation. Marcus moved around the counter, stepping into the employee area. "Hey, if somebody's in the back, I really need to pay for diesel. My truck's at pump 3. He approached the doorway to the back room. As he got closer, he noticed a smell. Not unpleasant exactly, but strange. Like ozone or the air after lightning strikes. Electric and sharp. Marcus stepped through the doorway. The back room was impossible. It extended far beyond what the building's exterior dimensions could accommodate. The room stretched back and back, the walls lined with shelves that reached up into darkness his eyes couldn't penetrate. The shelves held items Marcus couldn't identify, objects that seemed to shift and blur when he looked at them directly. that resolved into familiar shapes in his peripheral vision, only to become strange again when he focused. And there were people. They stood between the shelves, motionless, dozens of them. Some wore modern clothes, some wore styles from decades past. They didn't move or breathe. They simply stood facing the shelves as if shopping or browsing or waiting for something. Marcus took a step backward. What the hell? One of the figures turned to look at him. It was a man, middle-aged, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that might have been fashionable in the 1970s. His face was gray, not with skin tone, but with that same fine dust that covered everything in the front room. His eyes were dark holes, not empty, but filled with something deeper than emptiness. "Are you staying?" the man asked. His voice sounded like it was coming from very far away or from underwater. "What?" "No, I just need to pay for fuel." "Are you staying?" the man repeated, and Marcus realized it wasn't really a question. It was more like a recorded message, a programmed response. Marcus backed toward the doorway. Other figures were turning now, their dust-gray faces swiveling toward him with mechanical precision. They all asked the same question in overlapping echoes. "Are you staying? Are you staying? Are you staying?" Marcus bolted. He rushed through the doorway, across the employee area, around the counter. His hand hit the coffee pot as he passed, sending it crashing to the floor. Hot coffee splashed across his jeans, but he didn't stop. He slammed through the front door and into the parking area. His truck sat where he'd left it, the diesel nozzle still in its holster, unpumped. But the other vehicles, the pickup and the sedan, were gone. In their place sat 3 different vehicles, all of them older models from decades past. A 1960s Cadillac with tail fins, a 1950s delivery van, a 1940s coupe with running boards, all covered in that same fine dust, and standing beside each vehicle was a figure motionless, waiting. Marcus ran to his truck, fumbling for the door handle, his fingers clumsy with fear. He yanked himself up into the cab and started the engine, not bothering with his seatbelt, not checking his mirrors. He released the air brake and slammed the transmission into gear, pulling away from the pumps with a screech of tires. The figures watched him go, their dust-gray faces expressionless. Marcus accelerated down the frontage road, desperate to reach the highway again. The road seemed longer than before, winding through those dark woods, the trees pressing closer on both sides. His headlights caught movement between the trunks, more figures standing among the trees watching his truck pass. Finally, the entrance ramp appeared. Marcus took it too fast, his trailer swaying, cargo shifting audibly. He didn't care. He merged onto the highway and pushed the accelerator down, bringing his speed up to 70, then 75, putting distance between himself and that impossible place. He drove for 5 minutes, 10, watching his mirrors for headlights or pursuit. Nothing followed. The highway remained empty, peaceful, normal. Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His hands shook on the steering wheel. His fuel gauge showed 3/4 of a tank. Marcus stared at the gauge in confusion. When he'd stopped, it had shown a quarter tank, maybe less. Now it read 3/4, the needle steady and certain. He tapped it with his finger. It didn't move. The gauge insisted he had more fuel than before he'd stopped. He grabbed his logbook and checked his odometer. According to the numbers, he'd traveled 15 miles since crossing into Oklahoma. But he'd driven at least 20 miles to reach that fuel stop, plus the time on the exit ramp and frontage road, plus the return trip. The math didn't work. The distance didn't account for the detour. Marcus pulled over at the Pauls Valley Flying J 30 minutes later, parking in a well-lit space near the building entrance. He climbed down from his cab on legs that felt weak and walked into the familiar, blessedly normal interior. The clerk behind the counter looked young, bored, human in ways Marcus suddenly appreciated desperately. "You okay, man?" the clerk asked. "You look like you seen a ghost." Marcus managed a weak smile. "Just tired, long day." He bought coffee and returned to his truck, sitting in the cab with the door open, sipping the hot liquid, trying to process what he'd experienced. Part of him wanted to believe it had been a hallucination, a micro-sleep dream brought on by fatigue. But the coffee stain on his jeans was real. The memory was too vivid, too detailed, too coherent to be a dream. He pulled out his phone and searched for Jake's Travel Plaza, Oklahoma. No results. He searched for truck stops, US 77, Oklahoma, and found several listings, none of them matching what he'd seen. According to Google Maps, there was no fuel stop where he'd exited the highway. The map showed only empty land, undeveloped terrain between established exits. Marcus expanded his search, looking for news stories, urban legends, anything about a phantom truck stop in Oklahoma. He found references to abandoned gas stations, to strange encounters on lonely highways, but nothing specific to his experience. Either he was the first person to find that place, or anyone else who'd found it hadn't talked about it publicly. He drove the rest of his route in a daze, delivering his load in Toledo 2 days later. On the return trip, Marcus deliberately avoided US 77, taking I-35 instead despite the extra miles. He told himself it was for variety, but he knew better. He was avoiding that stretch of highway, avoiding the possibility of seeing that exit again. For 3 weeks, Marcus maintained his new route. Dispatchers noticed the change in his usual pattern, but didn't question it. Drivers often developed preferences for certain roads or routes. Marcus told himself he was being smart, cautious, rational. There was no reason to return to that highway, no benefit to seeking out that fuel stop again. But curiosity ate at him. The experience had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been impossible. And Marcus found himself drawn to impossible things the way some people are drawn to unsolved mysteries or conspiracy theories. What was that place? Where had those figures come from? Why did his fuel gauge show more after he'd left? Finally, on a run to Dallas in late November, Marcus routed himself through Oklahoma on US 77. It was daylight this time, just past noon, under a clear blue sky. He told himself he was being scientific about it, that daylight would prove or disprove his memory, that he'd find either a normal fuel stop he'd misremembered or nothing at all. He drove with his eyes scanning the roadside, watching for that exit. The landscape passed in familiar patterns, fields and trees and small towns, the ordinary geography of Oklahoma's plains. Marcus checked his odometer, marking the distance from the border. 20 miles passed, then 25, then 30. No exit, no fuel stop, nothing. Marcus felt simultaneous relief and disappointment. Maybe it had been a dream after all, a stress-induced hallucination. Maybe the coffee stain on his jeans had come from a different spill, a mundane accident his exhausted brain had woven into a nightmare. Maybe none of it had been real. Then he saw the sign. It stood on the shoulder, partially hidden by overgrown grass. Not a highway sign. Those were all maintained and official. This was a wooden post with a weathered board nailed across it. Hand-painted letters, faded but still legible. Jake's Travel Plaza, 1 mile. Marcus slowed, his heart rate increasing. He looked ahead, scanning for an exit. Nothing. Just empty highway stretching into the distance. He checked his rearview mirrors. No traffic behind him. He pulled his truck over onto the shoulder and stopped. The wooden sign stood about 30 feet ahead. Marcus climbed down from his cab and walked toward it. The sign was old, the wood gray with age and weather. The painted letters had bled and faded, but the message was clear. An arrow pointed east toward the tree line about 100 yards from the highway. Marcus stared into those trees. He couldn't see anything through the foliage, just shadows and branches. But he felt it, that same wrongness he'd experienced at night. that sense of a place that didn't belong in consensus reality. He stood there for 5 minutes debating. Walk into those woods and prove to himself what he'd seen was real? Or get back in his truck and drive away, leave the mystery unsolved and the memory unconfirmed? A voice spoke behind him. You can see it. Marcus spun around. A woman stood near the front of his truck, elderly, maybe 70 or 80, wearing clothes that looked decades out of date. She smiled at him sadly. Not everybody can see it, she continued. Most people drive right past, but you saw it once, so you'll always be able to see it now. That's how it works. What is it? Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. A trap, mostly. A way station for people who got lost. It exists in the gap between where you are and where you're going. If you go back there, if you go inside again, you might not leave. You were lucky the first time. You didn't accept their hospitality. You didn't say yes when they asked if you were staying. Marcus remembered the figures in the back room, their dust-gray faces, their repeated question. What happens if you say yes? The woman gestured toward the trees. You stay. You become part of it. You wait there forever, asking the same question to everyone who comes through, hoping someone will join you. It's hungry, that place. It needs people to keep existing. Every few years it pulls someone in. Most of them stay. But not you, Marcus said. She smiled again, and Marcus noticed how faded she looked, how transparent in the noon sunlight. Oh, I stayed. Long time ago, 1982, I was driving through late at night, stopped for fuel. They asked if I was staying, and I said yes. I'd had a fight with my husband. I was running away from my life. Saying yes seemed easier than figuring out where I was going. And here I am, 40 years later, still at that fuel stop, still waiting between one place and another. You're a ghost, Marcus whispered. I'm an echo, she corrected. The place makes echoes of everyone who stays. We stand in that back room, we stand in the parking lot, we stand in the woods and we wait for company. It's lonely, being nowhere. Marcus looked back at his truck, then at the woman. Why are you telling me this? Because you can still leave. You haven't agreed to stay. The place can tempt you, can try to trick you, but it can't force you. As long as you don't accept, you can walk away. So walk away, Marcus. Drive away. Don't ever come back to this stretch of road. How do you know my name? But the woman was fading, becoming more transparent, dissolving into the sunlight like morning mist. Her last words drifted to him. It knows everyone's name. That's part of how it traps them. Marcus stood alone on the shoulder. The wooden sign remained, its weathered letters pointing toward the trees. No ghost, no phantom woman, just him in the ordinary Oklahoma afternoon. He walked back to his truck, climbed into the cab, and drove away. In his side mirror, he watched the sign shrink into the distance. He didn't stop watching until it disappeared completely. Marcus never drove US 77 through Oklahoma again. He routed around it, adding hours to his trips, burning extra fuel, earning confused questions from dispatchers. He gave vague excuses about road conditions or construction, and eventually people stopped asking. But sometimes, late at night, when he's driving other highways in other states, Marcus sees things that make him wonder. A fuel stop that appears in a place where his GPS shows nothing. An exit ramp that seems too long, that winds through trees where there should be open land. An open sign flickering red in a window of a building that looks too old, too abandoned to be actually open. He drives past them all. He never stops, because he understands now that the roads aren't always what they seem, that there are places between places where reality becomes porous, where the lost and the lonely can become trapped forever in way stations that exist only for those who can see them. And sometimes in those ambiguous moments between full waking and true sleep, Marcus dreams he's standing in that back room again, surrounded by dust-gray figures. In the dream, they ask their question, Are you staying? In the dream, Marcus feels the temptation to say yes, to accept, to finally stop moving and simply be nowhere forever. But he always wakes before he answers, his heart pounding, his mouth dry, grateful for another day of forward motion on roads that lead somewhere instead of nowhere. He keeps a note taped to his dashboard now, just 4 words in black marker. Never say you're staying. Other drivers who catch rides in his cab sometimes ask about the note. Marcus tells them it's a reminder to keep moving, to stay motivated, to avoid complacency. They nod and accept this explanation. He never tells them the truth, that somewhere in Oklahoma, between 2 exits that don't exist on any map, there's a fuel stop where time doesn't work properly, where the dust of decades settles on hot coffee and bright lights, where figures wait patiently for travelers desperate or tired or lost enough to agree to stay forever. And Marcus knows with a certainty that haunts his dreams that the fuel stop is still there, still waiting, still asking its question to anyone unlucky enough to see it. He just prays he's never that desperate for fuel again. Story 3, The Voice in the Fog. Raymond Torres had been driving refrigerated trucks for 12 years, specializing in overnight runs between meat processing plants in Nebraska and distribution centers across the Midwest. He preferred the night shift, better pay, less traffic, and a certain peace that came with being one of the only people awake in a sleeping world. On March 3, 2020, Raymond learned that being alone on the roads at night wasn't always peaceful, and that sometimes the fog carried voices that shouldn't exist. He'd picked up his load at 3 p.m. in Grand Island, 28,000 pounds of frozen beef and pork destined for a warehouse in Des Moines. The run was straightforward, 4 hours of Interstate 80 through flat farmland, a route Raymond had driven hundreds of times. The weather forecast called for clear skies and mild temperatures. Everything was routine, predictable, safe. Raymond pulled out of the facility as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. His refrigeration unit hummed steadily, keeping the cargo at a steady 18 degrees Fahrenheit. His CB radio picked up occasional chatter from other drivers, warnings about a minor accident near Lincoln, recommendations for coffee at various truck stops, the usual helpful exchanges. Raymond contributed once, warning westbound traffic about a deer carcass in the right lane near mile marker 312. Night fell completely by 6 p.m. Raymond settled into his driving rhythm, maintaining a steady 65 miles per hour, letting his mind wander through idle thoughts and half-formed plans. He was thinking about his daughter's upcoming quinceañera, about the cost of the venue and whether he could pick up extra shifts to cover it, when he noticed the fog. It came from nowhere, appearing suddenly like a curtain dropped across the highway. One moment Raymond could see a mile ahead, his headlights reaching into clear darkness. The next moment, white fog enveloped everything, reducing visibility to maybe 30 feet. The transition was instantaneous, without the gradual thickening you'd expect from normal fog formation. Raymond immediately reduced his speed, dropping to 45 miles per hour. His hazard lights came on automatically. The fog was thick, almost solid-looking, reflecting his headlights back at him in a disorienting wall of white. He could barely see the road stripes, could barely make out the shoulder markers. His CB radio crackled. Any drivers eastbound on I-80 near mile marker 330? Anybody else hitting this fog bank? Raymond checked his odometer, mile marker 328, so pretty close. He grabbed his mic. Yeah, I just hit it. Visibility's terrible. Came out of nowhere. Roger that. I'm about 5 miles ahead of you. Just came through the other side. It's a narrow band, maybe 10 miles wide. Just take it slow. You'll be through it soon. Appreciate it, Raymond replied, feeling slightly reassured. 10 miles at reduced speed meant about 15 minutes. He could manage that. But 5 minutes later, the fog had grown thicker. Raymond slowed to 35 miles per hour, then 30. His headlights seemed to make it worse, the beams scattering off the white particles and creating a blinding glare. He switched to parking lights, which helped slightly. The road was still barely visible, but at least he could make out the lane markings. His GPS showed his position clearly, I-80 eastbound, approaching mile marker 333. Nothing unusual except the fog, but Raymond felt something off about it, something wrong. Normal fog had texture, variation, movement. This fog was uniform, consistent, almost artificial in its density. Then he heard the voice. It came through his CB radio, a woman's voice, desperate and frightened. "Please, someone help me. My car broke down and I can't see anything. I'm on the shoulder near mile marker 334. Please, I'm so scared. Is anyone out there?" Raymond keyed his mic immediately. "Ma'am, this is a truck driver about a mile behind you. What's your situation?" "Oh, thank God," the woman's voice came back, relief evident. "I don't know what happened. My engine just died and now I'm stuck in this fog. I can't see the road, I can't see anything. I'm afraid someone's going to hit me." "Stay in your vehicle," Raymond instructed, switching his headlights back on and watching carefully for a disabled car on the shoulder. "Keep your hazards on. I'll be there in a couple minutes." "What kind of car are you driving?" "A Honda Civic, blue. Please hurry." "I'm coming. Just stay put." Raymond accelerated slightly, pushing through the fog at 40 miles per hour now, his eyes scanning for hazard lights or the shape of a vehicle. Mile marker 334 appeared in his headlights, but he saw no car. The shoulder was empty. He keyed his mic again. "Ma'am, I'm at mile marker 334. I don't see your vehicle. Can you see my headlights?" Static answered him for a moment. Then the woman's voice came back. "No, I can't see anything. Wait, what mile marker did you say? Let me check." "I'm at 336, not 334. I'm sorry, I miscounted." Raymond's jaw tightened. 2 more miles. "Okay, hang on, I'm coming to you." He drove forward, watching the mile markers pass. 335, then 336. Again, no vehicle on the shoulder. The fog pressed in on all sides, thick as cotton, unchanging. "Ma'am, I'm at 336 now. I don't see you. Are you sure about your location?" The voice came back, and Raymond noticed something odd about it. The panic seemed artificial, rehearsed, like an actor performing fear rather than experiencing it. "I'm sorry, I think I'm at 338. I'm so confused. Please don't leave me." Raymond felt cold fingers of doubt creeping up his spine. Something wasn't right. He grabbed his cell phone from the charging mount. No signal. Not even one bar. He was in a dead zone, which was unusual for the interstate, but not impossible. He keyed the CB again, but this time he didn't address the woman. "Breaker 19, any other drivers on I-80 eastbound? Anybody else hearing this distress call?" Silence answered him, not even static. The channel was completely dead except for that woman's voice. "Please," the woman's voice came through again. "I'm at mile marker 340. I can see lights now. Is that you? Please help me." Raymond didn't respond. He maintained his speed, watching the markers pass, 337, 338, 339. The fog remained unchanged, that impossible uniform white. At marker 340, the shoulder was empty. The woman's voice changed, lost its desperate edge, became something else. "You're not going to stop, are you, Raymond?" He nearly dropped the mic. She'd used his name. He hadn't given his name on the radio. "Who are you?" Raymond demanded, his voice hard. "I'm alone out here," the voice continued, and it didn't sound like a woman anymore. It sounded hollow, distant, like wind through an empty tunnel. "I've been alone for so long, I need company. Why won't you stop, Raymond? Why won't you help me?" Raymond threw the CB mic down and focused on driving. His heart hammered against his ribs. The fog pressed closer, seeming to pulse now, almost breathing. In his peripheral vision, he thought he saw shapes moving through the white, large things that kept pace with his truck. Mile marker 341 passed, then 342. The voice came from his radio without anyone keying a mic. "I know everything about you, Raymond. I know about Elena's quinceañera. I know about the debt you're hiding from Teresa. I know about what happened in Austin in 2008, the thing you never told anyone. Raymond's hands shook on the steering wheel. The thing in Austin, he'd been involved in an accident, nothing major, but he'd left the scene because he'd had drinks earlier and was afraid of a DUI. No one had been seriously hurt, and he'd never told anyone, not even Teresa. How could this voice know? Stop the truck, Raymond, get out. Walk into the fog. I'll tell you things you need to know. I'll show you things you need to see. Just stop. No, Raymond said aloud, though he wasn't keying the mic. No, no, no. Mile marker 343 appeared and vanished. The fog was changing now, becoming less white and more gray, taking on textures and shapes that resolved into almost recognizable forms when Raymond looked at them directly, only to dissolve when he tried to focus. Faces appeared in the gray, distorted and wrong, mouths open in silent screams or laughter. Raymond couldn't tell which. His refrigeration unit shut off. The sudden silence was shocking. The constant hum that had been background noise for the entire trip simply stopped. Raymond's temperature gauge immediately showed the cargo area warming. 20 degrees, 22, 25. In minutes, thousands of dollars of meat would begin to spoil. He had to stop, had to check the unit, had to... No. This was part of it, part of whatever was happening. The voice wanted him to stop. Everything that was happening was designed to make him stop. Raymond kept driving. Mile marker 344 passed. The fog grew darker still, becoming almost black now, his headlights barely penetrating a few feet. The shapes were more distinct, figures standing alongside the road, keeping pace with his truck despite his speed. They weren't running. They were simply there beside him, matching his velocity impossibly. "You can't outrun me, Raymond," the voice said from his radio. "I'm already with you. I'm in your truck. I'm in your cargo. I'm in your thoughts. Just stop and let me in completely. It'll be easier that way. Fighting makes it worse." Raymond's temperature gauge showed 40 degrees in the cargo hold. The meat was definitely spoiling now. His entire load, ruined. The company would take it out of his pay. He might even lose his job over this. He had to stop and fix the refrigeration unit. His hand reached for the brake, then stopped. "No," Raymond said firmly. "I don't care about the meat. I don't care about the company. I care about getting through this." The voice laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Through what, Raymond? This is forever. This fog goes on forever. You've been driving for hours. Check your odometer. Check how much fuel you've burned." Raymond glanced at his gauges. His fuel tanks showed empty, completely empty. But his engine was still running, the truck still moving. That was impossible. Diesel engines didn't run without fuel. Mile marker 345 appeared, and Raymond saw something in the road ahead. A figure standing in his lane directly in his path. It was tall, impossibly tall, thin as a rail, arms too long, reaching down almost to the ground. As Raymond's headlights hit it, the figure's head swiveled toward him. It had no face, just smooth skin where a face should be. Raymond's instinct was to swerve, but he fought it. Swerving in this fog could put him in the ditch, or worse, could roll his truck. Instead, he maintained his course, aiming straight for the figure, his jaw clenched, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The figure stood its ground as Raymond's truck bore down on it. At the last moment, just before impact, it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed at Raymond. Then the truck passed through it like smoke. Raymond checked his mirrors. The figure stood behind him now, still pointing, growing smaller as he drove away. More figures appeared along the roadside, dozens of them, all pointing, all tracking his progress through the fog. "You should have stopped," the voice said. "Now you'll have to stay in the fog forever. You'll drive and drive and drive, and you'll never reach the other side. You'll run out of road eventually, Raymond. Everyone does." Mile marker 346, then 347. Raymond had been in the fog for over half an hour now. The driver who'd warned him about it said it was only 10 miles wide. He'd driven almost 20 miles since entering it. His truck began to shudder. The engine coughed, sputtered, running on empty, on fumes, on nothing. Any moment now it would die completely and he'd be stranded here in this fog, in this nowhere place with the voices and the figures and the impossible geography. "Just stop, Raymond," the voice whispered, intimate and close, as if speaking directly into his ear. "Rest. You're tired. You've been driving so long. Stop and rest and let me in." Raymond's vision blurred. He was tired, more tired than he could ever remember being. His eyelids felt weighted. His arms ached. The steering wheel seemed to be pulling at him, dragging him down into sleep. "That's right," the voice encouraged. "Just close your eyes, just for a moment. I'll take care of everything." Raymond's eyes began to close. His head nodded forward. The truck drifted slightly, right, toward the shoulder, toward the figures that waited there with their impossibly long arms and blank faces. A memory flashed through his mind. Elena, his daughter, 7 years old, sitting on his lap while he taught her to count in Spanish. Her laugh, bright and perfect, her small hands clapping when she got the numbers right. Her absolute trust that her father would always be there, would always come home. Raymond's eyes snapped open. He sat up straight, shook his head violently. "No, I'm going home. Elena needs me." He pressed the accelerator down, coaxing every last bit of speed from his dying truck. The engine protested, coughing and knocking, but it responded. 45 miles per hour, 50, 55, mile marker 348. The fog began to lighten, shifting from black to gray to white. "You can't leave," the voice said, and for the first time Raymond heard something like panic in it. "You're mine. You entered my fog. You belong here now." "I belong with my family," Raymond said. "You can't have me." Mile marker 349 appeared, and beyond it Raymond saw something miraculous, a star, a single point of light in the darkness beyond the fog. Then another star, and another as the fog began to thin. "No!" the voice screamed through his radio, the volume maxing out, distorting, becoming a wall of agonized static. "You belong to the fog, you belong to me." Mile marker 350 passed, and suddenly the fog was gone. Raymond's truck burst through into clear night, stars overhead, the highway stretching ahead in perfect visibility. His engine smoothed out, running perfectly. His fuel gauge showed half a tank. His temperature gauge read 18 degrees, the refrigeration unit humming steadily as if it had never stopped. Raymond's CB radio crackled with normal traffic. Drivers discussing road conditions, warning about speed traps, the mundane chatter of the highway. His cell phone showed full signal. His GPS confirmed his location, eastbound I-80, mile marker 350. He'd been in the fog for exactly 10 miles, not 20, not 30, 10 miles, just as the other driver had warned. Raymond pulled into the next rest area and sat in his truck for 20 minutes, shaking, crying, thanking God and the universe and whatever forces had gotten him through. Other trucks pulled in and out, their drivers oblivious, living normal lives on normal roads in a normal world. When Raymond finally calmed enough to move, he climbed down and checked his cargo. He opened the trailer doors, expecting to find spoiled meat, thousands of pounds of ruined product. But everything was perfectly frozen, the temperature consistent, no sign of any malfunction. He delivered his load to Des Moines 4 hours later without incident. The warehouse workers found no problems, no spoilage, no evidence that anything unusual had happened during transport. Raymond never reported what happened. Who would believe him? He'd driven through fog and heard voices on his radio. That's all. No evidence, no proof, nothing but his own experience and terror. But he changed his routes after that. No more overnight runs on I-80 through Nebraska. He took daylight shifts, shorter hauls, anything to avoid being alone on dark highways where fog might gather and voices might call from the white void. Sometimes, years later, Raymond hears other drivers on the CB talking about strange experiences. Fog that appeared from nowhere, voices that knew their names, figures standing alongside the road. When he hears these stories, Raymond keys his mic and offers simple advice. If you hear voices in the fog, don't stop. Don't answer. Just keep driving. Whatever's in that fog, it can only keep you if you agree to stay. Most drivers laugh it off or dismiss him. But occasionally someone responds with quiet thanks, and Raymond knows they've been there too. In that nowhere place where the fog speaks and the road goes on forever unless you have the strength to refuse. Elena is 22 now, and she knows her father did something significant years ago, something that changed him. She's asked about it occasionally, but Raymond always deflects, tells her it was just a close call on the road, nothing special. But on the night of her quinceañera, when Raymond danced with his daughter under bright lights surrounded by family and love and life, he whispered in her ear, "I came home for you. No matter what, I'll always come home." Elena hugged him tighter, not understanding but feeling the weight of it, the truth beneath the words. And somewhere in Nebraska, on a stretch of I-80 between mile markers 340 and 3050, fog sometimes gathers on clear nights for no meteorological reason. And sometimes drivers who pass through it report hearing voices on their CB radios. Voices that know their names, that know their secrets, that beg them to stop and rest and stay forever in the white void where time and distance have no meaning. Most drivers make it through. Most keep driving, refusing the invitation. But every few years, a truck is found abandoned on the shoulder, engine running, cargo intact, driver nowhere to be found. Authorities investigate, families grieve, mysteries remain unsolved, and the fog waits patiently for the next driver to accept its hospitality, to stop and rest in the comfortable nowhere between departure and arrival, where voices promise understanding and figures with no faces point the way to permanent rest. Raymond knows they're still out there, still waiting, still calling. He hears them sometimes in his dreams, whispering his name, telling him he can't really escape, that he's still in the fog and always will be, that everything since Elena's quinceañera, his retirement, his grandchildren, is just a beautiful dream he's having while standing motionless on a foggy highway, slowly becoming one of the pointing figures. But then he wakes, and Teresa is beside him, and morning light fills their bedroom, and reality, solid, warm, undeniable, proves the fog was wrong. He did escape. He is home. And that truth, more than anything, keeps him safe from the voices that still wait in white voids across America's highways, patient and hungry and forever calling to drivers who journey alone through the darkness. Story 4. The Repeating Accident. Christopher Dane had been a long-haul trucker for 8 years when the concept of time began to betray him. It happened on November 18, 2018, along Highway 191 in Wyoming, a remote 2-lane road that cut through desolate landscapes where towns were 40 miles apart and cell phone service was a luxury. Christopher was hauling drilling equipment from Colorado to Montana, running 3 hours behind schedule due to a delayed pickup, pushing through the night to make up lost time. The road was empty at 2 a.m., just as he'd expected. Highway 191 wasn't a popular route. Most drivers preferred the interstate system, even if it meant extra miles. But Christopher liked the solitude of these forgotten highways, the feeling of being the only human awake in a landscape that predated human observation. The drilling equipment in his trailer weighed 34,000 pounds, properly secured with chains and binders, stable and safe. The night was cold and clear, temperature hovering around 26 degrees. Christopher's heater worked overtime, keeping the cab comfortable while his breath occasionally fogged the inside of the windshield. He'd been driving for 6 hours straight, but he felt alert, focused, riding the comfortable edge between fatigue and full consciousness that experienced drivers learn to maintain. He was approaching a long, gradual curve when he saw the taillights. They were red dots in the distance, too low to be a truck. probably a car. As Christopher closed the distance, maintaining his steady 62 miles per hour, he saw it was a sedan, dark-colored, maybe blue or black, stationary in his lane, completely blocking the right side of the road. Hazard lights weren't on, no flares or warning triangles, just a car sitting in the middle of the highway. Christopher's training kicked in immediately. He checked his mirrors, no traffic behind him. He checked the oncoming lane, clear. He signaled left and smoothly moved around the disabled vehicle, glancing at it as he passed. The driver's side door was open, the interior light was on, but he saw no driver, no passengers. The car appeared empty, abandoned mid-journey for reasons Christopher couldn't fathom. He keyed his CB radio. Breaker 19, anybody monitoring Highway 191 northbound? There's a disabled vehicle in the right lane about 15 miles south of Big Piney. Dark sedan, driver's door open, no occupants visible. Might want to call Highway Patrol. Static answered him. Christopher tried again, cycling through channels, but found only silence. He was probably out of range of other drivers, and the terrain made CB transmission unpredictable. He'd have to report it when he reached cell phone coverage. He continued driving, putting the abandoned car behind him. Odd, certainly, but not unprecedented. Maybe the driver had run out of gas and started walking to the nearest town. Maybe they'd been picked up by a passing motorist. There were explanations, probably mundane ones. 5 minutes later, Christopher approached another gradual curve and his headlights caught taillights ahead. Red dots in the distance, too low for a truck, probably a car. As he closed the distance, he saw it was a sedan, dark-colored, stationary in his lane, blocking the right side of the road. Christopher felt a small electric shock run through his chest. This was impossible. He'd passed that car 5 minutes ago, had put miles between himself and it. But here it was again, identical. Same position in the lane, same open driver's door, same interior light glowing against the darkness. He checked his odometer. He'd traveled 4.8 miles since passing the first car. He was moving forward, making progress. But somehow the car was here again, waiting for him. Christopher slowed this time, bringing his speed down to 40 miles per hour as he approached. He studied the vehicle carefully. It was the same car, he was certain. Same model, same color, same license plate. Even the angle of the open door was identical. He passed it slowly, looking for any sign of the driver. Empty. No one inside, no one nearby. Just an abandoned sedan with its door open and its interior light burning. Christopher grabbed his CB mic again, but before he could speak, he hesitated. What would he say? He keyed the mic anyway. Breaker 19, this is North Star on Highway 191. I'm experiencing some kind of situation here. Has anyone else seen a disabled sedan on this route? Dark blue, driver's door open? Only static answered. Christopher drove on, his hands tighter on the steering wheel now, his attention hyper-alert. He watched his mirrors, watched his odometer, watched the road ahead with increased focus. Minutes passed. 3 miles, then 4, then 5. The curve appeared ahead, and Christopher's stomach dropped before his headlights even caught the taillights. He knew what he'd see. And there it was. The sedan, in the same position, door open, light on, waiting for him like a checkpoint or a warning. This time Christopher stopped. He brought his truck to a complete halt about 50 feet behind the car. Air brakes hissing in the silence. He sat there, engine idling, trying to make sense of what was happening. He'd driven nearly 10 miles since first encountering the car, but here it was again, exactly the same. Christopher pulled out his cell phone. No signal as expected in this remote area. He checked his GPS. It showed his position correctly, moving northward along Highway 191. No errors, no glitches. According to every instrument he had, he was traveling normally through normal space, except for the car that kept appearing ahead of him. Christopher made a decision. He grabbed his flashlight, zipped up his jacket, and climbed down from the cab. The night air bit at his face immediately, cold and dry. His breath plumed in the headlight beams. He walked toward the sedan, flashlight beam scanning the interior, the road, the surrounding darkness. The car was a Toyota Camry, maybe 10 years old, dark blue, Wyoming plates. The driver's door stood open at a 45-degree angle. Keys dangled from the ignition. The interior light illuminated empty seats, front and back. No luggage, no personal items, no coffee cups or fast food bags. The car looked like a rental or a recently cleaned vehicle, impersonal and sterile. Christopher reached out and touched the hood. Warm. The engine had been running recently. He walked around the car, checking the rear, the passenger side. No damage, no flat tires, no obvious reason for the vehicle to be abandoned. When he completed his circuit and returned to the driver's door, he noticed something he'd missed before. The odometer read 333 miles. All threes perfect repetition, a number so statistically unlikely for an ordinary vehicle that it felt deliberate. Christopher backed away from the car, his skin crawling. This wasn't natural. This wasn't a coincidence. Something was very wrong here, wrong in ways that violated basic reality. He returned to his truck, climbed into the cab, and put the transmission in gear. He drove around the Camry, accelerating back to highway speed, desperate to put distance between himself and that impossible vehicle. He made it 7 miles this time before the curve appeared again, before the taillights manifested in his headlights, before the Camry materialized in his lane like a digital glitch in reality's programming. Christopher drove past without stopping. His jaw was clenched so tight it ached. His hands gripped the steering wheel with enough force to make his knuckles white. He started counting in his head, marking time, trying to establish a pattern. The Camry appeared again at 4.2 miles, then again at 4.9 miles, then at 5.1 miles. The intervals were inconsistent, but the car was consistent. Always the same Camry, always positioned identically, always empty and waiting. Christopher tried varying his speed. He drove at 40 miles per hour for a while, then at 70. It made no difference. The Camry appeared on its own schedule, following rules Christopher couldn't decipher. He tried counting the repetitions. By his estimate, he'd passed the car at least 20 times now. He'd been on this stretch of highway for over an hour, driving constantly northward, making what should have been significant progress. But when he checked the last town sign he'd passed, it said, Big Piney, 22 miles. 20 minutes later, another sign appeared. Big Piney, 22 miles. The distance wasn't decreasing. He was driving forward but making no progress, caught in a loop that repeated the same segment of highway over and over. Christopher felt panic rising in his chest. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think rationally. This was impossible, yes, but it was happening, which meant there had to be a way through it, a way to break the loop. Loops had conditions, had rules. He needed to figure out the rule. He tried stopping at the Camry again, tried looking inside more carefully. The odometer still read 333. The keys still dangled from the ignition. Everything remained exactly the same as the first time he'd inspected it. On impulse, Christopher reached in and turned the key. The engine started immediately, running smoothly. The dashboard lit up. Fuel gauge showed half a tank, no warning lights, everything normal. Christopher turned the engine off, removed the key and pocketed it. Maybe that was the solution. Maybe he needed to move the car or take something from it or change it somehow to break the loop. He climbed back into his truck and drove away, the Camry's key heavy in his jacket pocket. 4 miles later, the curve appeared and the Camry was there again. Christopher slowed and looked carefully. The driver's door was open and keys dangled from the ignition. Different keys. The key in his pocket grew warm, almost hot, uncomfortable against his chest. Christopher pulled over and examined the key he'd taken. It looked normal, standard Toyota key with electronic fob. But it was heating up, growing warmer by the second, beginning to burn. He rolled down his window and threw the key out into the darkness. The heat stopped immediately. Christopher looked ahead. The Camry had vanished. The road stretched empty in his headlights. Hope flared in his chest. He'd broken the loop. Whatever rule governed this place, he'd satisfied it by returning the key, by giving back what he'd taken. Christopher accelerated, feeling triumph mixed with residual fear. He drove for 10 miles without incident, watching signs confirm his progress. Big Piney, 12 miles, then Big Piney, 7 miles. He was moving forward again, escaping whatever spatial anomaly had trapped him. Then he crested a hill and saw the accident. A semi-truck lay on its side in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. Diesel fuel pooled across the asphalt, reflecting his headlights like black mirror. The trailer had split open, its cargo of drilling equipment scattered across the road. Large metal components, chains, binders. Christopher's blood turned to ice water. He knew this scene. He knew it intimately. It was his worst nightmare. The accident he'd always feared having, but had so far avoided through careful driving and constant vigilance. But more than that, more terrible than that, he recognized the truck. It was his truck, same make, same model, same company logo, same rust spot on the lower passenger door. His truck destroyed and lying on its side while he sat in his truck, approaching the wreck. Christopher stopped 200 feet away, his mind refusing to process what his eyes reported. He climbed down from the cab on shaking legs and walked toward the wreck, flashlight beam trembling. As he got closer, he saw the driver. The driver was pinned in the cab, visible through the shattered windshield. The man's face was turned toward Christopher, eyes open, blood running from a head wound. The man was dead or dying, and the man was Christopher. Same face, same jacket, same identification badge hanging from the rearview mirror. Christopher stumbled backward, his flashlight dropping from nerveless fingers. He tripped and fell, landing hard on the asphalt, unable to breathe, unable to think. What he was seeing was impossible, couldn't be real, violated every law of physics and logic and reality. He was looking at his own corpse in his own wrecked truck. A voice spoke from the darkness. "You have to stop." Christopher scrambled backward, searching for the source. A figure stood near the wreck, a man middle-aged wearing a highway patrol uniform. But something was wrong with him, wrong in the same way everything here was wrong. He was too still, too perfect, like a wax figure or a photograph made three-dimensional. "Who are you?" Christopher managed to ask. "I'm what's left," the figure said. "I'm the echo. This is where it happened, where you died. November 18th, 2018, Highway 191, 2:47 a.m. You fell asleep at the wheel. The curve was too sharp. You were too tired. Your truck rolled. You died before the ambulance arrived." "No," Christopher said. "No, that didn't happen. I'm here. I'm alive." The figure gestured at the wreck. "That's you in the truck. This is you in the loop. You've been driving this same stretch of highway for years now, passing your own death over and over, unable to accept it, unable to move on. The Camry is a mercy. It's a checkpoint, a reminder. But you keep driving past it. You keep refusing to stop." "I'm not dead," Christopher insisted. "This is a dream or a hallucination or—" "It's neither," the figure interrupted. "It's the space between. You're not alive and you're not dead. You're stuck, replaying the last moments before the accident, searching for a way to prevent it. But you can't. It already happened. You have to accept it and stop driving." Christopher looked at the wreck, at his own corpse pinned in the twisted metal. A memory surfaced. He'd been tired that night, had been fighting to stay awake. He thought about stopping, thought about pulling over for a power nap. But he'd been behind schedule, had needed to make up time. So he'd pushed on, had driven through the fatigue, and the curve had come too fast and the truck had rolled in. "No," Christopher said again, but his voice was weaker now. "This isn't real. I'm going to keep driving. I'm going to reach Montana. I have a delivery to make." The figure shook its head sadly. "You'll never reach Montana. You'll drive this loop forever, passing the Camry, passing your own death, refusing to stop. Unless you accept what happened. Unless you let go." Christopher stood up, his legs shaky but functioning. "I don't accept it. I won't." He turned away from the wreck, away from the impossible sight of his own death, and walked back to his truck, the truck that was also lying destroyed behind him, somehow existing in two states simultaneously. He climbed into the cab, started the engine, and drove. The wreck vanished in his mirrors, swallowed by darkness. The Camry appeared ahead, door open, light on, waiting. Christopher drove past it, and again, and again. Each time he passes the Camry now, he knows what's coming. He knows the wreck is ahead, knows he'll see himself dead in the twisted metal, knows the figure will tell him to stop. But Christopher refuses. He drives through the loop, maintaining his schedule, completing his route in the only way available to him now. Sometimes late at night on Highway 191 in Wyoming, other drivers report seeing a phantom truck. It appears in their headlights, driving normally, then vanishes when they try to pass. Some say they've seen the driver's face, a man who looks exhausted and desperate, eyes fixed on the road ahead, hands gripping the wheel with white-knuckle intensity. If those drivers knew the truth, they might stop and try to help. But what help could they offer? How do you save someone who's been driving the same loop for years, who's trapped between departure and arrival, who refuses to accept that his journey ended long ago? Christopher doesn't know the answer. He only knows that he'll keep driving, keep passing the Camry, keep confronting his own death, searching for a route through that doesn't exist. Because stopping means accepting, and accepting means the final ending, the complete cessation that terrifies him more than the endless loop. So he drives, forever northward, forever approaching Big Piney without arriving, forever encountering the Camry with its open door and perfect odometer and unspoken invitation to finally stop, and forever refusing because somewhere in his shattered understanding of reality, Christopher still believes he has a delivery to make. Story 5. The Hitchhiker Who Knew Everything. Thomas Garrett had been a trucker for 19 years, and in that time he'd picked up exactly 7 hitchhikers. It wasn't policy. Most companies forbid it, insurance liabilities and all. But Thomas had a soft spot for people down on their luck, for travelers stranded by circumstance or bad planning. On the night of September 22, 2017, Thomas picked up his 8th hitchhiker on Interstate 40 in New Mexico and learned that some travelers carry destinations more terrible than any point on a map. It was 3 a.m., dark and cold, the kind of desert night that makes you believe the stars are close enough to touch. Thomas was hauling furniture from Phoenix to Memphis, running slightly ahead of schedule for once. In good spirits because his daughter had called earlier to tell him he'd be a grandfather by spring. Life felt manageable, predictable, full of small blessings. The hitchhiker appeared in his headlights about 30 miles west of Tucumcari, standing on the shoulder with his thumb out in the classic pose. Thomas almost drove past. He wasn't supposed to pick up riders, and something about the figure bothered him, though he couldn't articulate what. But then he saw the man more clearly as his headlights swept across him. Young, maybe 25, wearing a light jacket inadequate for the nighttime cold. No visible luggage or backpack. Just a person alone on a dark highway with nothing. Thomas's conscience won out over his caution. He slowed, pulled onto the shoulder about 50 yards past the hitchhiker and waited. The young man approached the passenger side and looked up at Thomas through the window. He had an ordinary face, unremarkable in every way. Brown hair, average height, clean-shaven. He could have been anyone, which maybe should have been Thomas's first warning. "Where you headed?" Thomas called down through the closed window. "East," the young man said. "Anywhere east. I can take you as far as Amarillo. That work?" "That's perfect. Thank you so much." Thomas unlocked the door and the hitchhiker climbed in, settling into the passenger seat with a soft sigh. Up close, Thomas noticed the man's clothes looked old-fashioned, not vintage hipster style, but genuinely outdated, like something from the 1970s or 80s. His jeans were the wrong cut, his jacket the wrong style, his shoes the wrong shape. "Cold night to be thumbing it," Thomas said as he accelerated back onto the highway. "Yeah," the young man agreed. "My car broke down about 10 miles back. No cell service, so I started walking. You're the first person to stop." "Well, you're lucky it's me and not some crazy person." The hitchhiker smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Luck has nothing to do with it." Thomas let that comment pass, chalking it up to stress or exhaustion. He asked the usual questions: name, where he was from, where he was going. The young man gave answers that seemed normal enough. His name was David Keller. He was from California, heading to see family in Tennessee. The details were vague, but not suspiciously so. People didn't always want to share their life stories with strangers. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the cab filled only with engine noise and the soft hiss of wind against the windows. Thomas felt comfortable with the silence. He'd learned long ago that quiet companionship was often better than forced conversation. But then the hitchhiker spoke again. "Your daughter Jessica called you earlier. She's pregnant, due in April. It's a girl. You're excited but also scared because you don't know how to be a grandfather yet." Thomas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He glanced at the hitchhiker, whose face remained neutral, calm, almost disinterested. How do you know that? About my daughter?" "You told me," David said, "just now." "No, I didn't. I haven't mentioned my daughter at all." David turned to look at Thomas directly for the first time. His eyes were dark, depthless, impossible to read. "You're going to tell me soon. You're going to talk about Jessica for about 20 minutes, about how proud you are, about how scared you are. I've already heard it. I'm just living through it again." Thomas felt cold despite the cab's heater. "What are you talking about? We've never met before." "No," David agreed, "we haven't, but we will. Many times. This ride happens over and over, Thomas. You pick me up, we have this conversation, and then... well, then comes the difficult part." Thomas considered pulling over and ordering this strange young man out of his truck, but something stopped him. Fear, perhaps, or morbid curiosity. "What difficult part?" David leaned back in his seat, apparently relaxed. "You're going to ask me about myself, where I'm really from, why I'm really out here. And I'm going to tell you the truth because I always tell you the truth. And then you're going to try to get away from me, but you can't, because we're already on the path, already locked into the sequence. It's unavoidable." "You're not making any sense," Thomas said, his voice harder now. "Maybe I should just drop you off at the next exit." "Mile marker 332, David said. "That's where you'll think about dropping me off. But you won't stop because you'll want to hear the rest of what I have to say. Because I'm going to tell you something about yourself that no one else knows." Thomas opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. Up ahead, illuminated in his headlights, was mile marker 332. Exactly as the hitchhiker had predicted. "How did you—" "I've done this before," David interrupted. "Many times. I know every mile marker, every word you're going to say, every thought that crosses your mind. This ride is a loop, Thomas. We're trapped in it together. You keep picking me up and I keep riding with you, and we keep having this exact same conversation." Thomas's logical mind rejected what he was hearing, but something deeper, Some instinct he'd learned to trust over 19 years of night driving on lonely highways told him the hitchhiker was telling the truth, or at least believed he was telling the truth. "Assuming I believe you," Thomas said carefully. Why? Why are we trapped in a loop?" "Because of what you're going to do," David said. "In about 30 miles, you're going to see something on the road. An animal, you'll think, a deer or coyote. You're going to swerve to avoid it. Your truck will jackknife. You'll die in the accident. And because I'm with you, I'll die too. We'll both die, and then we'll both wake up back here, back at mile marker 327 where you picked me up, and we'll do it all over again." Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs. "That's insane. That's not how reality works." "Reality is more flexible than you think," David said. "Death is more flexible. Time is more flexible. We're not in the normal world anymore, Thomas. We're in the moment before our deaths. Stretched out and repeated, a loop that plays over and over because we can't figure out how to prevent what's coming." "So don't hitchhike," Thomas said, his voice rising. "Stay off the highway. Break the loop that way." "I've tried," David said softly. "I've tried hiding in the trees, tried walking the opposite direction, tried lying down and refusing to stand, but you always see me, you always stop. This moment pulls us together like gravity. We're meant to be in this truck, having this conversation, heading toward the accident that kills us both." Thomas drove in silence for a moment, processing. If this was true and something deep in his gut insisted it was, then he had maybe 30 miles to figure out how to change the outcome. "What have you tried to prevent the accident?" "Everything," David said tiredly. "I've tried warning you earlier, but you never believed me until we're too close to the moment. I've tried grabbing the wheel, but my hands pass through it like smoke. I'm not fully real in this loop. I'm an echo, a ghost, a memory of someone who died here. Only you can change what happens. So I just don't swerve," Thomas said. "When I see the animal, I keep the wheel straight, hit it if I have to." "You would think that would work," David agreed. "But it doesn't. Your instincts take over. 19 years of driving, 19 years of avoiding road hazards, 19 years of training your reflexes to protect your cargo and other drivers. You can't override that in a split second. You'll swerve. You always swerve." Mile marker 340 passed. Thomas calculated quickly. Maybe 20 miles until the accident. 20 miles to solve an impossible problem. There has to be a way. If we're aware of it, if we know it's coming, we can change it. "I've thought that too," David said. "Hundreds of times, maybe thousands. I've lost count of how many loops we've done, but it always ends the same way. The animal appears, you swerve, we jackknife, we die, then we reset. Then we start over." Thomas felt desperation clawing at his mind. What did I see? What kind of animal? David hesitated, and for the first time, emotion crossed his face. Something like pity or regret. "That's the problem, Thomas. It's not an animal. It's your daughter." Thomas's foot came off the accelerator involuntarily, the truck losing speed. "What?" "Jessica appears on the road," David said quietly. "Standing in your lane, facing you. She looks real, solid, terrified. And you can't hit your daughter, Thomas. No amount of rational thinking, no amount of knowing it's not real can override that. You're a father. You swerve to save her. And we die." Thomas pulled over onto the shoulder, slamming the brakes, bringing the truck to a complete stop. His hands shook. His breath came in short gasps. Why would she appear? What is this? "I don't know," David said. "Some kind of manifestation, maybe. A projection from your subconscious, or something else. Something that feeds on the moment of death, that creates the loop to sustain itself. I've stopped trying to understand it. I just know it happens, and I know we can't prevent it." Thomas sat in silence, staring through the windshield at empty highway stretching ahead. Mile marker 343 stood on the shoulder. Maybe 15 miles to the accident now. 15 miles to figure out what hundreds or thousands of loops hadn't solved. "What if I don't drive?" Thomas asked. "What if we just sit here?" "The loop resets," David said. "After a while, time skips and we're back at mile marker 327 and you're picking me up again. Stopping doesn't work. Only moving forward, only going through the moment, only finding a way to change the outcome. That's the only path out." Thomas started driving again, slowly at first, then building back to highway speed. His mind raced through possibilities, through scenarios, through desperate plans. What if you're wrong? What if it's not Jessica? What if I prepare myself, convince myself beforehand that whatever I see isn't real? "You can try," David said. "You have tried. In some loops you succeed in not swerving. But then Jessica appears standing beside the road instead, bleeding, crying, begging for help. And you stop. You get out. And when you do, she vanishes and something else happens. Something worse than the jackknife. I won't describe it. Let's just say that stopping is not the solution." Mile marker 350 passed. 10 miles now, maybe less. Thomas could feel the moment approaching like a physical presence, like a weight pressing down on the cab. The air seemed thicker, harder to breathe. Time felt elastic, stretched too thin. "There has to be something," Thomas said, more to himself than to David. "Some variable we haven't considered, some choice we haven't made." David was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a strange quality, like he was remembering something. "In one loop, you drove with your eyes closed. You thought if you couldn't see Jessica, you wouldn't swerve. But you heard her voice screaming your name, and you opened your eyes anyway. The accident happened. Mile marker 355 approached. 5 miles, maybe less. Thomas could feel it now, could sense the approaching moment the way animals sense earthquakes before they strike. His heart raced. His palms sweated despite the cool air. "What if I'm supposed to hit her?" Thomas asked suddenly. "What if that's the test? What if I have to accept hitting my daughter, not the real Jessica, but the manifestation, to break the loop?" David turned to look at him with something like hope in those dark, depthless eyes. "I don't know. No version of you has ever managed it. But maybe that's the key. Maybe you have to choose the lesser evil, accept the terrible action to prevent the worse outcome." Mile marker 358 appeared in the headlights. Thomas's entire body felt electrified, every nerve firing, every sense heightened. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles cracked. "Tell me again it's not real. Tell me she's not really there." "She's not real," David said. "Jessica is home in California, safe, alive, pregnant with your granddaughter. What you're about to see is a projection, a lie, a trap. It's not your daughter. It can't be hurt. You can't save it. The only thing you can save is yourself and me if you can override your instincts and keep the wheels straight." Mile marker 359 passed, and the world seemed to slow down, time stretching like taffy. Thomas could feel each heartbeat, could hear blood rushing in his ears, could sense the moment coalescing around him like a noose. And then he saw her. Jessica stood in the middle of the highway exactly as David had described. She wore her favorite blue jacket, the one she'd been wearing in the photos she'd sent him earlier. Her face was pale, terrified. Blood ran from a wound on her forehead. She raised her hands toward his approaching truck, mouth open in a scream he could almost hear through the windshield. Every fiber of Thomas's being screamed at him to swerve, to save his daughter, to protect his child the way he'd protected her from scraped knees and bullies and bad boyfriends her entire life. His hands moved toward the wheel, muscles tensing, preparing to jerk the truck to the left. But he remembered David's words. "It's not real. She's safe. This is a trap." Thomas kept the wheel straight. The truck bore down on the figure of Jessica, and Thomas watched, eyes open, tears streaming down his face, as his daughter's terrified face filled his windshield. His foot wanted to break. His hands wanted to swerve. Every paternal instinct demanded he save her. But he maintained course. The truck passed through Jessica like smoke. She wasn't solid, wasn't real, just a projection, just light and shadow and malicious intent given temporary form. In his side mirror, Thomas saw her vanish, dissolving into nothing like morning mist under sunlight. The truck remained steady, no jackknife, no accident, just smooth forward motion on a straight highway. Beside him, David let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "You did it. You actually did it. You kept driving." Thomas couldn't speak. He was shaking too badly, his entire body processing trauma and relief in equal measure. He'd driven through his daughter's image, had chosen to hit her, even knowing she wasn't real, rather than swerve. The psychological weight of that action pressed down on him like physical mass. Mile marker 360 appeared, then 361, then 362. They were past the accident point, driving into territory the loop had never reached before. The highway ahead looked different somehow. More real, less like a stage set. The stars overhead seemed brighter. "What happens now?" Thomas managed to ask. David looked at his hands, turning them over, examining them as if seeing them for the first time. I think we leave. I think the loop is broken. I can feel it. Time moving forward normally, space expanding instead of repeating. We're free." Thomas pulled into a rest area 5 miles later. He parked the truck and sat in silence, staring at nothing, processing everything. David sat beside him, equally quiet. Finally, Thomas spoke. "What will you do now? Where will you go?" David smiled, and this time the smile reached his eyes. "I'm going to disappear, I think. I've been dead for a long time, Thomas. Since 1979, actually. I was hitchhiking through New Mexico, got picked up by a trucker, died in an accident at mile marker 359. I've been trapped in that moment ever since, repeating it with different drivers over the years, trying to find one strong enough to break the loop. You're the first who managed it." "So this was all to save you?" Thomas asked. "To save us both," David corrected. "You would have died there too if you'd swerved. The loop would have started for you and you'd have been trapped just like me, reliving your death over and over. But you broke it. You chose the impossible choice." David's form began to fade, becoming translucent in the cab's dim light. "Thank you, Thomas, for being strong enough, for trusting me, for doing what hundreds of drivers couldn't." "Wait," Thomas said. But David was already gone, vanished like the projection of Jessica, leaving Thomas alone in the cab. Thomas drove the rest of the route in a daze, delivering his furniture load to Memphis 2 days later. He called Jessica immediately afterward, hearing her voice, real, alive, unmistakably his daughter, and broke down crying on the phone, unable to explain why. He never picked up hitchhikers again. When friends or family asked why, he told them company policy, insurance regulations, the usual excuses. He never mentioned the young man named David Keller, or the loop that had trapped them, or the terrible choice he'd had to make to break free. But sometimes, late at night on lonely highways, Thomas sees hitchhikers standing on the shoulder. Sometimes they look like ordinary travelers, and sometimes they look faded, translucent, impossible. Thomas drives past them all, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, because he understands now what he hadn't before, that highways are haunted by more than just the dead. They're haunted by moments of death, by choices that echo across time, by loops that trap the unwary in endless repetition. Thomas broke one loop, saved one ghost, chose one impossible action over instinct and love and paternal desperation. He knows he can't save them all. He knows that somewhere on Interstate 40 near mile marker 359, other drivers might encounter other versions of the loop, might face their own terrible choices. He hopes they're strong enough. He hopes they keep the wheels straight. And he drives on, grateful for every mile that carries him forward instead of backward, away from death instead of into it, breaking free of repetition into blessed, linear, forward-moving time. Story 6. The Shadow Convoy. Robert Callahan had been driving 18-wheelers for 26 years, and in that time he developed an almost supernatural sense for road conditions and traffic patterns. He could feel when another driver was going to merge poorly, could sense when weather was changing before the first drops fell, could tell when his truck was even slightly out of alignment by the vibration through the steering wheel. On January 31st, 2019, Robert's senses told him something was very wrong with the convoy of trucks that appeared in his mirrors on I-90 through Montana. But he couldn't identify exactly what until it was far too late to escape. Robert was hauling frozen goods from Seattle to Minneapolis, running through the night because the refrigeration was cheaper when the outside temperature was below freezing. Montana in late January provided exactly that. The thermometer in his cab read -8 degrees Fahrenheit outside, with wind chill pushing it even colder. The highway was clear and salted, traffic was almost non-existent at 3 a.m., and Robert was making excellent time. He'd just passed Butte, heading east when the headlights appeared in his side mirror, 3 sets of them evenly spaced, closing on his position from behind. Robert's eyes flicked to the mirror automatically, assessing the traffic. 3 trucks looked like standard semi-configurations running close together in a tight formation. That was unusual. Most professional drivers maintain significant following distance, especially at night, especially in winter conditions. Running in close formation like that was dangerous, eliminated reaction time, increased the risk of multi-vehicle accidents. Robert frowned, but didn't think much of it. Maybe they were convoy. Buddies, drivers for the same company, showing off or being reckless. The trucks closed the distance quickly, running at least 80 miles per hour to Robert's 65. Within minutes, they were right behind him, and Robert could see them more clearly in his mirrors. The lead truck was a Freightliner with a standard box trailer. The second appeared to be a Kenworth with a reefer unit like Robert's. The third was harder to make out, but it looked older. Possibly a Peterbilt from the 1980s. Robert signaled and moved into the right lane, giving them room to pass. Professional courtesy and safer for everyone if these speeders wanted to go around. But the trucks didn't pass. They moved to the right lane behind Robert, maintaining their tight formation, staying about 100 feet off his rear bumper. Robert felt the first tingle of unease. He accelerated slightly, bringing his speed up to 70. The trucks matched him, maintaining the exact same distance. He tried his CB radio, keying the mic. "Breaker 19, you 3 trucks running convoy formation behind me. You guys want to go around? I'm happy to give you space." Static answered him. Robert tried again, cycling through channels, nothing but white noise. The trucks maintained their position, 3 sets of headlights burning in his mirrors, following with mechanical precision. Robert couldn't see the drivers through the glare of the headlights, couldn't make out any company logos or identifying markers on the trucks. He decided to slow down, let them pass whether they wanted to or not. He eased off the accelerator, bringing his speed down to 60, then 55, then 50. The trucks slowed with him, matching his speed exactly, maintaining that 100-foot gap. Now Robert was genuinely disturbed. This wasn't professional courtesy or coincidence. This was deliberate following, almost like harassment. He grabbed his cell phone from the charging mount. No signal. He was in a dead zone, which was common in rural Montana, but frustrating right now. The highway ahead was empty. Just dark asphalt disappearing into colder darkness under a sky heavy with clouds. No other traffic, no towns visible, just endless Montana emptiness. Robert made a decision. At the next exit, he'd get off the highway, let these weird trucks pass, wait a few minutes at the bottom of the ramp, then continue on. Simple solution. Exit 241 appeared ahead, some small town Robert couldn't remember the name of. He signaled well in advance, moved to the exit lane, and took the ramp at a safe speed. In his mirrors, he watched the 3 trucks signal in perfect unison and follow him onto the exit. Robert's hands tightened on the wheel. Okay, this was more than weird now. This was threatening. His mind went through possibilities. Highway robbery, maybe? Stories circulated among truckers about organized theft rings that would follow trucks to rest areas or dark exits, then disable them and steal cargo. But Robert's cargo was frozen food, not particularly valuable, not worth a sophisticated operation. At the bottom of the ramp, Robert turned right onto the frontage road. The town was completely dark. No street lights, no building lights, no signs of human habitation. Just empty storefronts and dark houses along a main street that looked abandoned or asleep. The 3 trucks followed, maintaining their formation, their headlights creating overlapping pools of harsh white light on the road. Robert accelerated, looking for a place to turn around to get back on the highway. But the frontage road continued straight through the small town, and he saw no turnoffs, no side streets, just buildings pressing close on both sides. His CB radio crackled suddenly, making Robert jump. A voice emerged from the static, male, emotionless, speaking in a monotone. "You can't escape the convoy. You're part of it now." "Who is this?" Robert demanded, keying his mic. "What do you want?" "You're part of the convoy," the voice repeated. "You've always been part of the convoy. You just didn't know it yet." Robert saw an intersection ahead finally, and he cranked the wheel hard right, taking the turn without signaling, hoping to break away from his pursuers. His trailer swung wide, tires squealing slightly on the cold pavement, but he maintained control. The 3 trucks followed, turning in perfect synchronization, as if controlled by a single mind. The road Robert had turned onto became narrower, darker, hemmed in by trees now instead of buildings. He was heading away from town, into wilderness, exactly the opposite of what he wanted. He needed people, lights, witnesses, police. He tried his cell phone again, still no signal. His GPS showed his position as somewhere outside the town, but the road he was on didn't appear on the map. According to the GPS, he was driving through empty terrain where no road existed. In his mirrors, the 3 trucks maintained their pursuit, and Robert noticed something that made his blood run cold. The trucks weren't producing exhaust vapor. On a -8-degree night, every diesel engine should be creating thick clouds of exhaust, condensation visible in the headlights. But the trucks behind him produced nothing. Their exhaust stacks were dark, as if the trucks were rolling forward without engines running. "You're part of the convoy," the voice repeated on the CB. "Accept it. Join us. It's easier than fighting." "Join what?" Robert shouted at the radio. "What the hell is this?" The trees on both sides of the road began to thin, and Robert emerged into an open area. A truck stop, he realized with relief. A large parking lot, fuel pumps, a building with lights on. Salvation. But as Robert pulled into the parking lot, his relief curdled into horror. The lot was full of trucks, dozens of them, maybe 100, parked in neat rows, silent and dark. No drivers visible, no movement, just truck after truck sitting in perfect arrangement. And every single truck was old. Not just old, ancient. Models from the 1970s, 1960s, even earlier. Configurations that Robert had only seen in museums or vintage truck shows. Brands that didn't exist anymore. Paint schemes decades out of date. The 3 trucks following Robert pulled into the lot and parked in a row, their headlights dying simultaneously, engines, if they'd been running, going silent. Robert sat in his idling truck, staring at the impossible collection of vehicles around him. The CB crackled. "Welcome to the convoy. Park your truck. Join us. You'll never have to drive alone again." Robert put his transmission in reverse and backed away from the parking spot he'd been approaching. He needed to leave, needed to escape this place, needed to return to the highway and normal reality. But as he backed up, more headlights appeared, blocking his path. 4 more trucks, these even older, rolling into position behind him, trapping him in the parking lot. "You can't leave," the voice said. "No one leaves the convoy. We've been driving forever, Robert. Through decades, through time, through the spaces between roads. We pick up new drivers when we need them. You've been selected. Your truck will join ours. You'll drive with us forever, and you'll never be alone." Robert's mind raced. He couldn't drive forward. Trucks blocked him. Couldn't reverse, trucks behind him. But to his left, he saw a gap between 2 parked trucks, just wide enough maybe for his trailer to squeeze through. He made his decision. He cranked the wheel hard left and accelerated, aiming for the gap. His trailer clipped the corner of one of the parked trucks, metal screeching against metal. But Robert didn't slow down. He muscled his truck through the gap and out of the parking lot, onto what looked like another service road. Behind him, engines roared to life. Dozens of them, all those ancient trucks starting simultaneously. In his mirrors, Robert saw headlights coming alive like waking eyes, a coordinated awakening of machines that shouldn't run anymore. The convoy was pursuing him again, but now it wasn't just 3 trucks. It was all of them, every vehicle in that impossible parking lot, forming a stream of headlights behind him like a luminous snake. Robert pushed his accelerator down, bringing his speed up to dangerous levels on the narrow service road. He had to find the highway again, had to return to normal space where the rules of reality applied. The convoy followed, and Robert realized they weren't just following randomly. They were organized, coordinated, some trucks moving to parallel roads he could glimpse through the trees, some maintaining pursuit directly behind him. They were herding him, driving him toward some destination he couldn't see. His fuel gauge showed empty. That was impossible. He'd had 3/4 of a tank when this started. But the needle rested on E, and as Robert watched, his engine began to sputter. "No, no, no," Robert chanted, willing the engine to keep running. But diesel engines didn't run on willpower, and his truck began to lose speed, coasting now, power dying. The convoy closed in. Robert could see them clearly now in all his mirrors. Dozens of trucks, maybe more than 100, surrounding him on all sides, a mechanical herd corralling him like predators with prey. His truck rolled to a stop on the side of the service road. The engine went silent. Robert sat in the sudden quiet, listening to his own ragged breathing, watching as the convoy formed a circle around him, headlights pointed inward, trapping him in an arena of light. The CB radio hissed, "Join us, Robert. Get out of your truck. Leave it behind. Walk into the convoy. Become part of us. Drive forever with us through the spaces between." Robert looked at the door handle. All he had to do was pull it, step down, walk into that circle of light. The voice was seductive, promising eternal companionship, promising he'd never be alone on dark highways again. But something in Robert rebelled against it. He was 52 years old. He had a wife in Minneapolis, 2 grown sons, 3 grandchildren. He had a life that existed outside of highway driving, a life he wanted to return to. "No," Robert said aloud. He grabbed his emergency kit from behind his seat, road flares, reflective triangles, a flashlight. Among the supplies was a small flare gun, something most truckers carried for emergencies, for signaling help in remote breakdowns. Robert loaded the flare gun and pointed it out his window, aiming at the nearest truck's fuel tank. He pulled the trigger. The flare shot across the space in a bright red streak and impacted the side of an ancient Mack truck. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the truck began to fade, becoming translucent, its headlights dimming as if the flare had wounded it somehow, disrupted whatever energy or intention kept it manifested. The other trucks reacted, pulling back slightly, their circle loosening. The voice on the CB screamed, no longer monotone but filled with rage. "You can't fight us. You're ours. You belong to the convoy." Robert loaded another flare and fired at a different truck. Same result. It faded, became ghostly, its headlights dying. He fired again and again, targeting trucks in different directions, creating gaps in the circle. As the flares found targets, the convoy began to dissolve. Trucks faded one by one, becoming see-through, then vanishing entirely like smoke in wind. The coordinated mechanical presence that had felt so overwhelming broke apart into scattered confusion. Robert's fuel gauge flickered, then jumped back to showing 3/4 of a tank. His engine, which had been dead, turned over when he cranked the key. Diesel rumble filled the cab, normal and reliable and blessedly real. He put the transmission in gear and drove through the gaps he'd created in the convoy circle. The remaining trucks tried to pursue, but they were fading now, losing coherence, unable to maintain their manifestation. Within moments, Robert was driving alone on the service road, no headlights behind him, no mechanical presence pursuing him. The service road curved and eventually merged back onto I-90. Robert found himself at mile marker 247, just 6 miles from where he'd first noticed the convoy. The entire detour through the town and parking lot had somehow compressed spatially, or perhaps had never existed in normal geography at all. Robert drove the rest of the route in daylight, refusing to stop until the sun rose. He delivered his load to Minneapolis 18 hours late, claiming mechanical problems and refusing to elaborate despite his dispatcher's questions. He never reported what happened. Who would believe him? Phantom trucks, impossible truck stops, a convoy of ghosts trying to recruit him into eternal driving. It sounded like the plot of a bad horror movie, not something that happened to professional truckers with decades of experience. But Robert changed his routes after that. He avoided Montana, avoided I-90, avoided any highway where he might encounter organized groups of trucks traveling together. When other drivers on CB radio mentioned seeing strange convoys, Robert remained silent, unwilling to confirm or encourage those stories. Sometimes late at night in rest areas, Robert meets other drivers who have strange stories, who talk in hushed voices about trucks that follow them, about convoys that appear from nowhere, about offers to join something that promises eternal companionship on lonely roads. Robert listens to these stories and offers simple advice. If they ask you to join, say no. If they try to trap you, fight back however you can. Light hurts them, flares, fire, anything bright and real. And remember, you have a life beyond the highway. Remember the people waiting for you. That's what breaks their hold. Some drivers nod thoughtfully, others dismiss him as paranoid or crazy. But occasionally someone thanks him quietly, and Robert knows they've encountered the convoy too. Knows they've felt the seductive pull of eternal driving without responsibility or destination. Robert is 60 now, approaching retirement. His wife asks him when he'll finally stop driving, when he'll stay home and enjoy grandchildren and rest. Robert tells her soon, always soon. But he's waiting for something first. He's waiting to be sure the convoy has moved on, has found other highways, has stopped looking for him specifically. Because sometimes in his nightmares, Robert sees those headlights again in his mirrors, sees that parking lot full of ancient trucks, hears that voice promising he'll never be alone. And sometimes, driving certain routes in certain conditions, Robert glimpses them. 3 or 4 trucks running in tight formation, appearing in his mirrors and then vanishing, as if checking on him, as if reminding him they're still out there. The convoy doesn't forget. It never forgets. It drives through decades and through the spaces between roads, searching for lonely drivers to recruit, building its numbers one captured soul at a time. Robert escaped once. He prays he won't encounter them again. But he knows with a certainty that haunts his remaining highway years that the convoy is patient. It has existed for longer than modern trucks, longer than paved highways, longer than the internal combustion engine. It's the manifestation of something older, the human compulsion to keep moving, to never stop, to drive forever through empty spaces away from responsibility and life and time itself. And it's always recruiting, always waiting on dark highways, always watching with dozens of eyes made of headlights, always ready to welcome new members who are tired enough, lonely enough, desperate enough to accept the invitation to drive forever in mechanical companionship, freed from destinations and consequences and the difficult work of being human in a world that demands we eventually stop moving and face ourselves. Robert will retire soon. He'll park his truck for the last time and walk away from highways forever. But he'll never quite escape. Because once you've seen the shadow convoy, once you've been selected and refused their offer, you carry them with you always. A knowledge of what waits in the spaces between mile markers, in the gaps of maps where roads shouldn't exist, in the organized darkness of trucks that have no drivers but drive anyway, endlessly, searching for company in their eternal, pointless journey to nowhere. Robert knows this truth. Some roads lead somewhere. But some roads lead nowhere, and some roads lead to places worse than nowhere, places where driving becomes the only reality, where the journey becomes the prison, where motion replaces life until you forget you were ever anything but a driver in an endless, shadowy convoy. He escaped that fate. He chose life over eternal movement. But on dark nights when sleep won't come, Robert lies awake and wonders, did he really escape? Or is he dreaming now, dreaming of retirement and family while his truck rolls on forever in the convoy, his hands on a wheel that never stops turning, his eyes watching mile markers that count neither up nor down but simply repeat in an endless loop of meaningless numbers? He doesn't know the answer, and that uncertainty is its own kind of horror following him into retirement and beyond. A shadow that never quite resolves into either light or complete darkness. The convoy is patient. It's been driving for a very long time. It can wait for Robert to doubt himself enough to return to the highway one last time, to check if the convoy is really still there, to confirm his escape was genuine. And if he does return, if he climbs into a truck one more time to prove to himself he's truly free, the convoy will be waiting. It's always waiting. That's what it does. That's all it does. Wait and drive and recruit and expand, a shadow spreading across America's highways, mile by endless mile. Robert knows this. He knows the only way to win is to never check, to never confirm, to live with uncertainty rather than risk discovery. So he stays home. He watches his grandchildren grow. He holds his wife. He exists in normal time and space, far from highways and mile markers and headlights and mirrors. And if sometimes he hears diesel engines in his dreams, if sometimes he wakes convinced he's still driving, if sometimes he sees 3 sets of headlights following him in impossible places, well, those are just memories, just psychological scars, nothing more. They have to be nothing more. Because the alternative, that he never really escaped, that he's still trapped in the convoy and everything since is just a dream his dying mind constructed, is too terrible to accept. So Robert doesn't accept it. He chooses to believe in his escape, in his retirement, in his reality. And most days that belief is enough. Most days.